Hey JOMC 300, good to be back with you. This will be a video for week 2 and for week 3. Uh, so we'll make up a little bit of time here, but we will only have one assignment for the 2 weeks, and that will be due on July 26th. So lots of good information in this video. It'll be a little long, so let's get right into it. Let's review just a little bit of what we did in week 1. One of the first things, maybe the most important thing, is we defined what is photojournalism. So, very quickly, let's review some of the things. Photojournalism, using photos and images to tell a story. The objective of photojournalism, to tell a story better than the text. What's the impact of photojournalism? Well, it can bring events to life. It can make the event more relevant to the viewer. And it certainly can have a powerful effect, not only on a viewer, but on society. And because it can draw people into a story more than photos people are drawn into a story more from the photos than from the text. People like looking at pictures. People like watching television, right? More than they like reading. And the same thing comes with photos. So if a photo can tell a story, it's going to have a greater impact because more people are going to look at the photo than are actually going to read the story. We talked about what are some of the elements of good journalism. And, you know, it should be narrative. It should be able to tell its own story. That's the real, I mean, that more than anything, tells you what a great picture is. It can tell its own story. You don't have to have a caption. You don't have to have text. And most often we do, and that's okay. But just think the greatest pictures can tell their own story. But that's important. A lot of times, great pictures can tell a story, but we just have to give it a little context. And we'll do that actually later on in this video. But we'll look at some pictures and we'll decide, is it a story? Does it tell its own story? Does it have great narrative? Or might it, if we just knew a little bit more, if we understood how this picture was taken in the context of what it was taken in? Is it objective, right? Non-biased. It should accurately reflect the event. We should not be staging photojournalism photos. There is a type of photography that does that, not photojournalism. Is it timely? You know, is this a photo you've taken on a current issue? Is it relevant to the story you're trying to tell at the time? And is it aesthetically interesting? Meaning, you know, is it a great looking photo? Does it touch the mind or stir the mind and touch the soul? You know, not every photo can do that. But if you take a photo that really, really touches someone, and sometimes it can be something very innocent. Sometimes it's something you don't even know you're touching. But if just what's ever in the frame looks aesthetically interesting, that's a great element to a photojournalist. So a few basics. We talked about mostly photojournalism is about humans or people, not inanimate objects. Not, you know, we're not photographing bowls of fruit and calling that photojournalism. We're also not taking portraits. We're not just lining people up like for a class photo and calling that photojournalism. We want to show faces and not just the back of the heads. We want to show emotions. That's a big, big important part. Can you show facial or nonverbal expressions of the people in your photo? Because if the subject or subjects in your photo are showing emotion, there's a greater chance that the audience who sees it will also engage with it and show emotion. And the more emotionally attached we might be to your photo, the more attached we are to you and your story. And so that's really important. Showing emotion is really one of the main divisions between just being a photographer and being a photojournalist. Is there action in the photo? You know, you want to take photos of people doing something. Anything that's just staged or nobody's doing something or just standing there, is not really photojournalism. Again, it can be a type of a type of photography, but not really photojournalism. And can you shoot something unusual? You know, if you find something extraordinary in the mundane, that's what tells a great story. And that's what can set you apart. And that's one of the things we want to do at A&T is we want to set ourselves apart. Can we see something in a story, in an event that other people won't be able to see? And then can we get to the right place and take the right photo at that right moment? And we'll talk about that later on. A couple more things. Obviously, focusing is really important, especially not only because it navigates for the audience where you want them to look, but also if you, obviously pictures being in focus is important, but if you can focus on one aspect of the photo, and we saw some of those photos where maybe the foreground was in focus and the background out of focus, your audience's eyes goes to what's in focus, and you're literally telling the audience that's important. So that's some of the great control as a photojournalist. You get to decide what's actually important in your own frame for the audience to focus upon. You're saying, this is the story I want you to know about. And visually interesting angles, we talked about that. If wherever you are, shoot from multiple angles. You know, don't shoot everything straight on. You shoot from the side, you can give your photo depth, right? You don't just have to shoot with a flat front where you have length and width. Shoot from an angle, get that third dimension, depth, and your photos look much more visually interesting. All right, so what I have right here, this is a photojournalism checklist. Whenever we look at a photo, whenever we take a photo, and we are this photo to help tell the story, we should actually sort of in our own mind, you don't have to necessarily write all this down, but do you have a photojournalism checklist? And so what are the elements that we just talked about? What are the basics? So these are the questions I would ask myself when I look at a picture. Particularly one that I took. Is it just photography or is it photojournalism? Is it a narrative? Does it tell its own story? Is it objective? Is it not biased? You know, if we only took pictures of our family at an event, that's kind of showing bias, unless that's what the story is. So, you know, there's different ways to look at it, but, you know, are we telling the truth of what is happening right then and there? Is it timely? Is this a current event? You know, is it is this photo timely to the story that's being told? Is it aesthetically interesting? Is it going to, you know, rock someone's world? Is it going to stir their soul? Right? And then some of the basics. Are there people in it? Or is it just inanimate objects? That's a big thing, especially for the next one, because you can't really show emotions in inanimate objects. So some people think that taking shots of animals, you know, people love to take photos of dogs and cats. What is the story though? If you're just taking an interesting shot because the dog's playing, you know, that may not be photojournalism. But if that dog is playing and splashing on a hot day in a pool with a big smile on its face, or maybe is shaking and you get the water as it comes off the dog's coat, maybe you are telling a story there. So again, context is very important. You know, you're showing a hot sunny day. Maybe you're showing the dog park, and that's part of a story that you're trying to tell with photos. So context is important. Action. Yeah, we want to see action. That's a real basic. I would ask myself, is there action in this shot? Or is it just people standing around? Is something unusual happening? Is this an unusual event? Is somebody doing something a little bit different that this photo will tell a great story? And of course, is there a focus in this photo? Do I want my audience to look somewhere? Have I selected interesting and visually interesting angles to help tell the story? maybe to help see more in the picture than just a two-dimensional shot. So I'm going to ask myself those questions when I see photos. So I think this is a really important area, and this is what we were going to talk about. I did kind of take out all the stuff about camera specifics, okay? We just aren't really going to focus on that because we don't check out cameras in this class. But if you do have a DSLR, I'll have a little bit of that coming up. But since most of us are probably going to use our cell phones, we don't have quite as much luxury in terms of being able to manipulate the photos that we are going to take. Now we can in Photoshop and other picture editing software, and we'll get into that next week also, but I held off on that just to get straight into the differences between photojournalism and photography. They are not one in the same. And one of the biggest differences is photojournalists are shooting an event as it happens. That makes a lot of sense. We're not staging it. An event is taking place. A march is happening in downtown Greensboro. We're going to shoot that event as it is happening. We don't go back and say, oh, well, this is where they were marching. No, we want to show when they're marching. That's the story. The people who are marching, the emotion on their face, their signs. What story are they telling? Well, we can help tell it with photos. So we want to shoot that event as it's happening. We don't want to shoot after the march is over. Photojournalists are observers. This is important. We cannot put ourselves in the story. We have to be observing almost from a distance, even though we can get in there and get in close. And sometimes it's really good to get in close to get great shots. But we're observers. We are not part of the event. We are not putting ourselves into the event. So, there's a big difference between that. If we were a demonstrator, remember how we said to be non-biased and objective? We can't really be a photojournalist and be part of the demonstration ourselves because we have a vested interest then in that case. So we want to be off on the side. And I don't necessarily mean off on the side in that you have to stand on the side to take your photos, because you want to take those photos wherever you can get them. But we want to be nonpartisan observers. So photojournalists never stage or set up photos. There's a type of photography that does that, right? I mean, most photos that we take of our family, if we go to an amusement park, which I'm going to tell you about, we stage photos. Oh, stand here, stand here. Oh, yeah, hold this up, or that kind of thing. Portraits. We're observers of an event as it happens, so we don't stage or set up the photos. We want to tell the story as it's happening. Real life photography. Photojournalists take lots of pictures. You may have to take 100 pictures, which is great in the digital age because now you don't have to develop them like they did in the old days. But take a lot of pictures maybe to get that one that really tells the story you want to tell. But also a lot of times you take a lot of pictures, and particularly now with online platforms, you can use multiple pictures to help tell the story, right? You don't have to just necessarily have one photo the way you normally did back in the days of newspapers. Now you can have multiple photos, and they could just kind of be shuffled along in the story, or the audience gets to decide which ones they want to look at. So take as many pictures of an event as possible, because the more you have, the better chance you're going to have that one photo that tells your story. Because another thing I'll get into later is, how do you get that magic photo right at the right second? Well, one of the things that helps is you just take a lot of photos, and then you're going to hopefully get that right one at the right second. So You get what you get. You get what you get. I know that sounds, I think that was close to a lyric in a Rolling Stones song. You guys probably, you can't always get what you want. That's what the lyric was. But you know this lyric, One Moment in Time from Whitney Houston, right? But that's what a photo is. And that's what a photojournalist is capturing. Really a moment in time. Generally about 1/60th of a second, because that's usually about the shutter speed, the average shutter speed of a camera. 1/60th of a second is what it's capturing. That really is one moment in time. And that moment's gone the second you hit that, you click your camera. Another moment will be coming up, and it might be extremely similar, you know, for the next photo. But that one moment in time is only one click. So that's what I mean by you get what you get. You can't stage it. So you have to, again, I'm going to get into all this, but you have to be in the right place at the right time to get that right one moment. One of the other big differences between photojournalism and photography is composition. And this is kind of pulling together all of what I was just kind of saying, but composition, the definition is how the visual elements look within your frame. Now you're going to see definitions that say how the photographer arranges the visual elements to look within your frame. That's not what photojournalists do. Photographers will do that. They get to arrange. Photojournalists don't, okay? So portrait photographers and videographers can arrange those visual elements. If you think of a videographer, you think of a movie. Every single movie, virtually, every shot is set, right? They know exactly where the lights are going to be. They know exactly where the actors are going to be. They're going to block it. They know where the camera's going to move. So everything is set up and arranged to get the perfect take. That's not a luxury photojournalists have. Photojournalists cannot arrange the visual elements. They shoot them as they happen. You know, we don't have the luxury as photojournalists of all the lighting that a portrait photographer or even a videographer might have on their cameras. I mean, we might have a flash, but in terms of using some kind of foil to keep the sun from baking down and getting into somebody's face, no. You know, they'll do that in a movie. They'll hire somebody. They'll hold up a cardboard or styrofoam to bounce the sun. But we can't do that as photojournalists. We shoot what is there, what is available. We cannot rearrange or arrange visual elements. So photojournalists do not do that. So again, photography can stage lighting. Photojournalism uses available light. Photography can always look pleasing because you can arrange all these and you can take multiple pictures and you can say, oh no, you weren't smiling, your eyes were closed. Let's do it again. All right, give me a big smile, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Move people out of the sunlight if it's shining in their eyes. Photojournalists don't do that. And so sometimes photojournalists' photos don't look pleasing. Sometimes the content of a photojournalist's shot won't look pleasing. We saw those war photos. We're going to look at some photos next week when we talk about ethics that are really going to be, disturbing. They're not always pleasing, but are they telling a story? And a lot of times they tell a very important story. So that's probably, the biggest thing that as a photojournalist, we have to get used to when we're not doing that. We get what we get, and it may not always look as great. And we probably wish a lot of times, oh, if I could just have that person move, or if I could just rearrange this, if I could just get one more take, if this, I'll ask that person to smile. We can't do that as photojournalists. That's not photojournalism. Now, we talk about composition. Composition in any type of photography is challenging, but for photojournalism, it's specifically challenging. And so we'll get into what some of the rules of composition are. There's a lot of them, but I've just picked out 10 that I think are really important that you will find yourself challenged with. These are rules that photographers use to take nice looking pictures. And you know, there's probably 30 or 40 rules in a lot of ways, but I've picked out the ones that I think are most challenging for us as photojournalists. And the first one is the rule of thirds. Now, you've probably heard this, but this is the most standard composition term that you will hear. And one other thing I will say is a lot of these will end up contradicting one another. So even though there's rules, and here's the one thing I want you to know, there are no unbreakable rules, you know, especially for photojournalism. So all I'm going to do is give you these guidelines on how, you know, a good looking photo should look, and then you can go out and you can break those rules. But you can't break them until you know them. So we'll give you about 10 of the most standard ones, and if you don't follow them, I just want you to know why you're not following them, and so that if you're doing it, you're breaking it, you know why you're doing it. And sometimes, especially in photojournalism, you can't follow all these because you're getting that one moment in time. You're getting that event as it's happening. You don't have a luxury of setting everything up like a portrait photographer. So just keep that in mind. These are breakable rules, but I just want you to know them. So rule of thirds is probably the most standard. What is the rule of thirds? Well, if you look at this graph, you can see where those 4 red circles are. Those are visual points of interest. And what that really is saying is, whenever we look at a frame, a photograph, same for television, our eyes immediately go to not the center of the frame, but to one of those 4 visual points of interest, those tic-tac-toe board connecting or interconnecting or crossing lines. So where the vertical meets the horizontal, that's where our eyes go. And so what that means is, even though it's such a millisecond in time, we actually would like to find something visually appealing, visually interesting to be in at least 1 or 2 of those intersecting points. And again, it's not an exact science, but the rule of thirds, you can see how it's been broken into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. And so where they intersect, where the red circles are, if there's something visually interesting at about that spot, the audience is more engaged. Look at this as if it were a close-up of someone's face. The 2 upper red circles, where they interconnect, you could easily see as being where someone's eyes are. And we do say that the eyes are the windows to the soul, right? So that's visually interesting for a lot of people. But it also, in one of those rules we talked about, it gives a photo more depth when you use the rule of thirds. So everything's not centered and flat and equal and balanced, although that's going to be our very next rule. So that'll be kind of interesting. So this young boy roping, you can see where his face is, where his eyes are, right on one of those intersecting lines. That's a visual point of interest. The most common spot, by the way, is the upper left. And that has to do with the way we see things. It really has more to do with the way we read. We read left to right. And so we just unconsciously or subconsciously almost always look to the upper left first. So if that can be where your visual point of interest is, that's probably the most effective. But this one is right there, and there's lots going on in the photo. It's a action photo. Um, it's kind of interesting because of the blurriness and everything. But that's what the rule of thirds is. This is another one that doesn't have the guidelines, but again, both his face in the upper right intersecting lines, about where his eye line is, you can see that, and in the lower left where the intersecting line, where he's tying the knot, where the knot is on the wood. Both of those are pretty major visual points, points of emphasis that if our eyes go to that, we will understand the photo. So it's a well-balanced, well-looking, or nice-looking photo, and that's using the rule of thirds. Now, a lot of these other photos, I'm going to show some photos in various places. They will actually have multiple of these rules, but for right now, that was the one we were looking at. So let's look at centered or symmetry, because you can put your main subject, your main focus right in the middle. The main question is the shot balanced? If you have somebody right in the middle, what's on the left, what's on the right? Is it too heavy on the left, meaning like some kind of busy background, so that being in the center actually looks awkward? So let's just kind of look at a couple. That's an interesting shot. You know, you go to the checklist. Is this a photojournalism type shot? Is it telling a story? Well, again, that's where, we'll get to it, but that's where context is important. Is there context to this? And there very well might be. You know, a rainy night in New York City. Or, you know, the loneliness of a musician after hours. May depend what the context is. But that is a nice centered photo. As you can see, the subject is right in the center, so it does not use the rule of thirds. This contradicts the rule of thirds. But notice how the buildings in the background are well balanced on each side. Okay, the red telephone booth in London, that is centered. Now, there may not be great symmetry in this one, but there might be. It depends how you look at it. We also have another thing we'll talk about in a second, but leading lines. And there isn't really symmetry in this, in that you're only seeing one other side of the street. But that other side of the street is leading your eyes away from the phone booth. And some people would probably have a issue with this in a photojournalism sense. But it also, again, it just depends on the context. But again, no humans, so there's no emotion. Another one, now this one's well balanced, right? You got the building, you got the guy walking across the street, you got the great looking, you know, this is what I mean by the aesthetics, the visual aesthetics. Look at the reflection of the building in the foreground, in the rain, in the water, on the streets. And it's well balanced on each side, and I think the fog gives it a nice touch. We saw this one last week, but so here's Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston. But notice he is centered. But this is a well-balanced shot in that not only is he centered, and he's literally the main focus of this, you hardly even notice the guy on the canvas, right? But the background, virtually the same. You know, you can barely see the audience in the background. It looks very similar on each side, which in this case does not draw our attention away from Muhammad Ali standing over the guy, Sonny Liston. So this is kind of interesting. This is well balanced. It's centered, right? There's symmetry. Little girl, is she dancing with a broom? Is she, looks like she's almost, her fingers are if it were a musical instrument. So I don't know what the context is, but it's an interesting looking shot. Is it photojournalism? Not sure, but it is centered with symmetry. This guy, close up, so you can have a close up of a guy, right? He's right in the middle. Even the bottle of water he's pouring on his head is right in the middle. But this might be telling a story. Oh, it's a hot day, right? So again, context. Another thing, common composition challenge is foreground interest. Generally, we want more of our interest in the foreground of the photo, not in the background. But it isn't always that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. But generally, in a general sense, and so this is a great rule that know it, and now you can break it. But if we take a look at here, and there's a whole bunch now of scouting photos, but our focus is on the gentleman, and also notice the rule of thirds being used well. He's a good, step or two in front of everyone else. He's also taller. It may also be part of the camera angle, but he is our focus. We are focused on him. There's foreground interest. The rest of the people at the camp are kind of in the background. Because they're away from him. Now everybody looks like they're happy and everything, but our visual interest is in the foreground. And so if the idea is that as a photojournalist, we want to tell a story of this guy, the scout or the scoutmaster, then that's a nice photo. This one's not really a very nice photo. This guy's the subject, and yes, he's in the foreground and he's in focus, but we don't really know what he's holding. I guess he's holding a mule or a donkey or something, but there's more interest in the background, really, because you can sort of see that animal. So while there is foreground interest in this one, it wasn't framed very well, and our eyes are actually more, at least in my case, more inclined to see what's going on in the background where I can see the animal. This one, does this work or not work? Does it tell a story? Does it not tell a story? So that's where the checklist comes in. But you see the flag in the foreground and then the statue in the background. But what it does do, though, is it kind of minimizes the two scouts there. And if you were if as a photojournalist you were trying to tell a story of the scouts, this would not be an effective photo, just because the flag and the statue overwhelm the flag in the foreground and the statue in the background overwhelm looking at the two scouts, whatever they're doing. It looks like they're holding a wreath. Angles and depth. That could be a big challenge in photojournalism because, again, we don't have the luxury to set ourselves up. It's almost like we have to be in the right place before things happen. But this is kind of a nice angle. Look at and it also does the exact same, as I said, some of these will have multiple things. These four soldiers are in the foreground. All right, so there's foreground interest, but there's also great interest behind them, all the scouts marching, carrying the flag and marching, and they all have, different color hats and the like. So it's very interesting, but it's kind of the angle that this shot was taken at. It gives it that great depth where you can not only see the four guys in the foreground, but you get a great sense of what's going on in the background. Whereas, let's say the photojournalist had quickly run around and only took a front-on picture of the four U.S. Army guys saluting, you would miss all of this in the background. And that's where angles and depth can come in. Okay. This is an angle where it's kind of shooting down on these scouts. Is that significant? I don't know. And this is one of those ones where it looks like everybody's happy. They are doing something. There's action. Does it help tell a story? Well, again, context. What is the story that you're trying to tell? But you can tell that they did take a specific angle of probably standing at normal level while all these scouts are on the ground. You can see them on their knees. So they're shooting down. And there's reasons to do that, but there's also, with angles, if you're shooting up at somebody, you are giving them authority. You're giving them power. You're saying this is significant. This is a person you want us to pay attention to. When you shoot down, you're actually minimizing the importance, so the significance of the people in the photo. There can be reasons for that, but are you doing it for a reason? Do you know what the reason is? Leading lines, leading looks. So whenever there are lines, whether it's horizontal, vertical, our eyes will want to follow the lines. And in this case, our eyes actually do. We are actually following that up to the sky because we want to see where are these rectangles going. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when our eyes go upwards like that to the top of the frame, what are we minimizing? Well, in this case, we're minimizing, there's actually a person walking in that. See, with the orange shirt? And so we've really minimized and de-emphasized that person where our eyes are not looking at that person. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but just know that if you have lines, think of a fence line. As the fence line goes on, people's eyes are drawn to where's this fence going, even if it runs off the frame. And the question you have to ask is that taking the attention, the focus away from what I want the subject to be? And this is what we would call leading looks. So if you see this guy, when we as an audience, we will follow where someone's eyes are going. So if you do have somebody in profile or even 45 degrees, we want to know where they're looking at. So if you have a guy like this, you want him to be on the side of the frame, using the rule of thirds is a great example, so that he's not looking, so that he's looking more towards the center and not just off. Because if he's looking off frame, close to where his eye line is, we're going to look that way. And then we're not going to pay attention to what's in the photo, to what you want us to see. So, so this is pretty good. I mean, he could possibly be a little bit more off to the right side of the screen, but it's much better than this. So look, if he were looking that way, then our eye line goes immediately off frame. So that's what leading lines and leading looks are. We will follow somebody's eye line, and we will follow where lines are, whether it's the horizon or vertical lines. We see it in the sky a lot. If you see like the clouds all moving off in one direction, we're going to follow that. And so that's important as a photojournalist because you don't want your audience to not look at what you want them to look at. Another composition challenge is lighting, and there's not a lot we can do about that as photojournalists. We don't have the luxury of portrait photography or videography or making movies where we can bring in external lights, where we can try to diffuse the sun, the light that's already out there. But I did want to show some photos that you can use the available light effectively. So this is a shot at night, and this guy has turned his lantern on, and it's a nice looking shot from rule of thirds and foreground and everything, foreground visual interest. But the light from the lamp is enough to light up his face. And again, that means we can see the human face, we can see the emotion, and that helps us as a photojournalist if there's a great context for this story or for this picture. If there isn't, it's still a nice looking photo. But if there was a great reason to take this photo, but we didn't have the lamp on and there was nothing shining on his face and we couldn't see his face, we couldn't see his emotion, we've probably lost that picture as being important to the story you want to tell. Yeah, that one doesn't do anything for me. This is a really neat photo. And look again, the leading lines. We're going to look off to the right because that's the way the boat is going. That's where the light is leading us. But yeah, using available light and just the fire that the guy at the head of the boat is using, that light is enough to see a reflection and to at least see the faces a little bit of at least like the first 3 scouts. So that's a great use of available light for photojournalism. And I think that allows this picture to tell a story. Okay, so let's talk about focusing and isolating the subject. That's a common composition challenge. Mostly begin because we don't get the luxury to arrange things the way we want to. This is a great photo though. This tells a story. Now you say, well, wait a minute, that's just sort of a portrait. Well, we talked about one of the things last week was people in their profession working. And, if we knew the context, but, we think of an older gentleman playing a horn, so he's probably a jazz musician, but you can see in his eyes wisdom, age. It looks like he's just waiting to play the right note. But look at the focus. The focus is all on his face. His face tells the story. Yes, we see the horn, but it was shot in such a way, and great lighting, by the way, that the horn is not significant as much as he is. I mean, it's nice to know that that's what he's playing, but he is the story, not the horn. And I think that's a great photo. Also, you can look at the leading lines. Look at the way the line of the horn leads right to his face. If you kind of follow that, and this uses the rule of thirds really well. So this is really a good photo. And if you think, well, that's kind of a portrait, this is kind of the photojournalism that I think can be really effective when we can tell stories of people. And to me, this photo tells a lot. I might need a little more context, sure, and I'd probably like a caption so I can know who he is and that kind of thing. But I think that's a good work from a photojournalist and not just a photographer. This again, the focus is on the 2 scouts with the wreath. You got the 1 scout out of focus in the foreground. It's probably a little big for me, the guy in the foreground. He takes up a little too much space, but the focus is on the other 2 who are laying the wreath, where I think that's where the story is. But I would probably have preferred not to have seen quite so much of the head and the whole back of the guy in the foreground. To me, that's a little obtrusive to focusing on the subject. So this is also very challenging. Does your background give context to the subject you're shooting? So, and again, you're not going to get this in every one. Remember the guy we just saw playing the trumpet? There's really no background there, right? We don't see him on a stage. We don't see a smoky jazz club kind of thing. But a lot of shots, the background is very important, particularly like if you are at an event, because you might want to focus on a subject, but what's in the background really tells you what the event is all about. So this is kind of interesting one. Here's a little boy running, And why is he running? Don't know. What's the story? Don't know. But there are some things that, you know, you can probably guess this is probably in England or maybe Ireland. They are or Scotland. They're wearing kilts. Um, Obviously, a pretty fancy building, almost maybe like a castle. Does that have anything? Um, this is kind of one of those centered symmetry kind of shots, but the background helps tell the story of the little boy, right? Because he must be rich, must live in the English or Irish countryside, or Scotland, again, because of the kilts. Looks like a grandfather or somebody walking further behind. So we get a little more context from the background than if we just had a close-up of the little boy running. This one's kind of interesting because if we just saw the backs of 5 people with safety at sea shirts on, it wouldn't mean a whole lot. But they're kind of sitting on a grate or a bench right at the edge of the river, and we see all the, I don't know if those are Coast Guard cutters or, but it looks like safety boats ready to go out on patrol. And so the background in this photo really tells us more than the foreground, even if we were focusing on the 5 subjects. The background is much more interesting and probably a better story to be being told. Here again, the background kind of if you only saw 2 people on a canoe, you might not know everything, but here you can tell from the background it's kind of murky water. It's, you know, they're not alone. Looks relatively calm, but looks like they also are in some sort of you know, dense forest out on the lake. And it just provides good context, much more, tells us much more of the story than if we only just saw the 2 rowers up front. All right, so there aren't going to be photos for these, but I'm just going to quickly talk about some of these things. I think these are important to keep in mind. And one of the most important ones is some of the kind of things we might go out on as a photojournalist. We have to be aware of our own safety and security. And so what is that? Well, we're easily identifiable because we may have a camera and we may be shooting things that other people aren't. And you know, people might not want their picture taken, but if they're at a public event, you have every right to take their photo. They may say, oh, no, no, don't take my photo. And they could get belligerent. And sometimes we have to weigh that. Is it worth getting this photo? Is this going to help me tell my story if this guy wants to hit me? So, you know, those are things that we really, as photographers, have to be very conscious of. We want to get close to the action. And, you know, the closer we are to the action, and distance does matter. I mean, it really matters. The closer you are, the better shots you're going to get. The more real your pictures will feel. But again, the closer you get, the more your safety or security could be compromised because people may not want you there. And, you know, those are things that just make photojournalists vulnerable. So those are things to think about. Another challenge is we often have to get permission to do events, to be in an event, both public and private. You cannot just walk into a basketball game and start shooting pictures, or walk down to the court and say, oh, I want to get good, great close-ups. You can't always just walk into a school board meeting without permission. You might be able to go to a demonstration downtown, but they might have limitations to where you can be. You know, they may say, well, all media, all photographers have to be here. And it might not be where you want to be because it might be away from the action. And, just like in real estate, location, location, location is important for a photographer, for photojournalism. You want to have access to the action. So know what kind of permission you need and can you move around to get to the place where you want to be. All keeping the first one in mind, being safe and secure, right? You want that access. You don't want to be limited. Can I get here? Am I allowed to move around? Because the more you can, the better shots you're going to get for the story you're trying to tell. So this is a big challenge, capturing that decisive moment in time. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. And yeah, your shutter speed is probably about 1/60th of a second. That's the moment you're capturing. You're not even capturing something that happened for a second, just for like 1/60th of a second. And that moment's gone forever after that. So, you know, one of the challenges is, when is that decisive moment? And do I wait for it? Do I just keep shooting, hoping it comes to me? Do I know where I need to be to get to it? So we'll talk about this in a second, but intuition's a part of that. But how do I get that one photo from that one moment in time that's going to tell my story? And uh, it's hard. It's hard. You can shoot 100 photos at an event and walk away disappointed saying, yeah, I mean, I got some good shots, but I didn't get that one shot I really wanted. I didn't get that one shot that I think tells the whole story. Not because even necessarily of your anything you did wrong, but just because the people are moving around, and as you were moving around, other things changed, and somebody moved in your way, and they started moving these things. It happens. Um, Finding an interesting story to tell, that's a huge challenge. So you guys saw those photos last week that I took of the Fun Fourth here in Greensboro. What's my story? The Fun Fourth itself, I got a lot of shots. I don't have a great story to tell. Nothing wild or significant happened at the Fun Fourth this year. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to group those photos, and I'm going to find smaller stories. I'm going to tell the story about the people who wore red, white, and blue and how patriotic they are. I can group some photos together and I can start to develop a story that way. I have a lot of shots of people eating food or ordering at the food trucks. And that's a big deal here in Greensboro, the whole food truck industry. I might have a photojournalistic type of story from some of those photos. So I can find stories. I took a whole bunch of shots of one of the bands from many different angles and got some close-ups, and this one musician moved into the audience. Maybe there's a story to tell about that band. So the whole event in itself, even though I have over 120 photographs, I might not really be able to tell a story. But if I break it down and I have these smaller segments, maybe there's a good story in those photos. And maybe, the greatest thing is when you just have that one photo that just tells it all. And I don't know if I have it from that event, but that's a big challenge. Find that interesting story to tell. This is hard to teach, but having an eye for detail, your intuition, I know what's going to happen next. I know where I need to be. You look at a scene and you see something that nobody else sees. Your eye for detail. Oh, I know what's going to happen. That drummer is going to go on a solo. I want to get in position where I can have a great shot when he steps out of line. Does it happen? Maybe. If it doesn't happen, you probably haven't lost anything. But if it does happen and you're the only photographer who says, I'm going to get the perfect shot, that's the difference between being a photojournalist and just a photographer. You're going to get that great shot that tells a story. Tells the story of the drum solo, of that one drummer. You might have a really interesting background as everyone else is watching him. So that's how we, become great photojournalists. An eye for detail, an intuition of where should I be? What's going to happen next? And this is the most important one, and this is the toughest one. What is good news judgment? What is newsworthy? That's a hard question to ask, or a hard question to answer. If photojournalism was just about showing up at an event and taking pictures, anybody could do it. But you have to understand the context of the event, know the key participants, have some idea what makes this event unique, and then find the images to tell that story. That's a huge challenge. And you can do that and then turn around and say, you know what? All these photos I took are great photos, but it's not newsworthy. There's no real news story here. Can you find one? And that's where that eye for detail and the intuition of being a journalist, that's where the word journalist separates photographers from photojournalists. You're going to have to also become a journalist. Find the story. What is the story there? So beyond getting all your basics taken care of, your press credentials, bringing the camera equipment, having everything right, you want to tell people something with your photograph that they are not going to get from reading a story. And all those things we talked about of setting them up is how you do that. But probably the biggest key is it even newsworthy? You have to know that. You have to decide that. And, your news judgment as a journalist will tell you. But I tell you, you take great photos. You can take people places more than just reading a story does. And that's what we really want to try to emphasize for our next couple of assignments. Everybody walks around with a camera nowadays, so everybody thinks they can be a photojournalist. But really, a good photojournalist, differentiating themselves from a top photographer, it's almost like night and day, right? The expectations are going to be higher on you, and it's harder to keep your audience interested. You follow these rules and then you break these rules. So it's not an easy task to find a photo that tells a story. Is this newsworthy? Is the event newsworthy? And a lot of times it just will end up being how you shoot it. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at that checklist one more time, and I'm going to do this very quickly because I think we're already going too long, but just going to look at some photos, and just based on the checklist, do we think this is newsworthy? Or is it more portrait photography? Or is there a story there? Or can there be a story there if we knew the context? That might actually be the key. And that'll be a big part of your next couple assignments, because we're going to test your news judgment. And there is no right or wrong, but I'm just going to give you my personal opinion based on a real quick look at the photographs. So again, the checklist, the elements: narrative, objective, timely, aesthetically interesting. The basics: are there human and people? Are there emotions? Is there action? Is there something unusual happening? Interesting focus or angles. All right. So this older lady with her dog, that to me looks like portrait photography. To me, that is not photojournalism. Okay. This guy with his plane, well, is there a story there? Is that an old World War II plane? I don't think so. Is he a flyer? We did say that there's a type of photojournalism where you get people, kind of at their jobs if he's a pilot, but it looks a little too stagey for me. Maybe if he was tinkering with the plane, or, fixing it, or, had a wrench in his hand and was doing something. But this to me looks like regular photography. So this guy, this is again more Boy Scouts, he is doing something, and he's got some emotion on his face. He seems very pleased. I'm not exactly sure what that is, but obviously it's some kind of logging, and I guess they are cutting the logs. Um, Everybody's kind of just sitting in the background watching him. I don't see a story in this. I don't really know what he's doing. If I knew what he was doing, maybe there'd be a difference. But in this case, I don't see a story. To me, that's not newsworthy. That one, definitely not newsworthy. Now, something's going off frame, right? Because everybody's looking that way. But what are they looking at? Probably what they're looking at is more interesting than just seeing these guys looking at it. So to me, this is not newsworthy. Again, not really newsworthy. I mean, again, the scouting, if I were talking about, if I was trying to do a news story on scouting and making breakfast or something, this has a nice looking shot, the one guy in the foreground, our focus goes to him, that uses the rule of thirds, but do have, interesting background too. But I don't really see a story. So this one's kind of interesting because we see a bunch of scouts. They're not all, looking at the camera as if it were a group photo, right? We have three young guys in the front. But what do we notice about all three? Well, all three are black and everyone else is white. So there really might be a story there. If we look on their sleeves, their arm sleeves, we can see 736. It's hard to see the 6, but I can see it on one of them. And even the fourth guy next to him has 736. So we know they're all part of the same troop. This might be worth investigating as a photojournalist. Why are these guys here? Because they clearly stand out somewhat. So if I know this for a fact, scouting is trying to reach out to become more diverse. So maybe there's a story there. Maybe they are from an inner city. And that's one place where scouting is virtually non-existent. And I know that the Boy Scouts of America are conscious of that and are trying to reach out and make scouting available to more people. So there could be a story in that. So that even though this looks kind of like a portrait, like, oh, smile, guys, there literally could be a story there. So, if we knew a little more context, or as we as the journalist part of photojournalists, we might investigate. Is there a story here to be told? Or is this just a picture of three guys smiling? So we never know. All right, this is kind of interesting, right? Travis Scott performing in concert. Look at the nice rule of thirds. He's, he's doing his job. Look at the emotion on his face. You could say, well, this is part of a news story if you wanted to shoot photos of a Travis Scott concert. Another shot used kind of the center and the symmetry, got the light shooting up at him and the smoke. So that's kind of interesting, right? So if you were at a concert of his, you could say, oh, I might make this a newsworthy event. Okay, another nice looking shot, again centered. The lighting is, really, really interesting. These are very visually interesting photos. But what if you were doing that and you just happened to be at Astro World when that tragedy stuck? All of a sudden, some shots you took might have completely new emphasis, right? I mean, this is one of the things that they showed. It says, see ya on the other side. Well, if you took that from the audience, you probably say, oh, well, in my pictorial essay of Travis Scott's concert, I'll never use that. And all of a sudden, this shot, which is pretty innocuous, comes back and has a big meaning, right? Just taking a shot of all the people in the crowd. When you took it, you wouldn't have thought anything of it. But for those of you who don't know, 10 people were killed, and there was kind of a stampede, or they got crushed as people kind of rushed the stage. So all of a sudden, other photos that you may have taken, here we have people. Um, I don't know if they're actually trying to get out or get in. A lot of times concerts like that, but you can see people jumping over those barriers. But now, after the tragedy, this is a big, big story. And so this happens in photojournalism all the time, where a story continues. You were at one event and it led to something else and leads to something else. And as a photojournalist, as any kind of journalist, you want that to be your story. I mean, if you were the one that was there at the original concert, you want to be the one at the memorials. So a shot like at a wall like this, where people, held a vigil and lit candles and put up flowers, um, you know, that means something. But that's part of the story too. And so the Travis Scott Astroworld concert wasn't just the concert. I mean, it went on for days and days, and so you'd want to have shots like this. Even a press conference. We talked about press conferences can be very boring, but look at the emotion on everyone's face. Obviously, one guy's the police chief. I think the other guy with a hat is the mayor, but it doesn't really matter. Just look at their faces, their eyes. You see that emotion, and all of a sudden, covering a press conference as a photojournalist is different than one of the very congratulatory and, oh, we're introducing our new vice president, da da da, because you have a whole different context, and the emotion is, I mean, you can just see that emotion on their faces. You can see the emotion on this guy's face. He was also a police detective, I believe, that normally you just don't see, at a very typical press conference. So, if you are at an event, you want to be the journalist of record for that event, and so you want to um, go back, and if there's a follow-up, if there's a march the next day, or God forbid, something tragic like this, but you want to be there for those next moments. So, go back to my photojournalism checklist. you know all the Travis Scott ones hit all the elements and all the basics. Individually, they may not have, and certainly they may not have if there wasn't a tragedy. Who cares to see a shot of the audience at a Travis Scott concert? What is that really saying? Is that part of a story? Yes, it's part of this story. It's part of this story. It may not be in his next concert, but for this one Astroworld tragedy, every single shot that we saw could be part of telling that story. So I'm putting the checklist up one more time. So I told you I went to Pigeon Forge in Gatlinburg, and this will seem silly, so I'm going to go through it real fast. But Gatlinburg has bears everywhere. Not real bears. They do have real bears in the Smoky Mountain National Park, but if you walk through the town, I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but everything's got a bear. Whether they're figures, whether they're up on top of buildings, whether on billboards or buses and whatever. And I just started taking pictures of them. But I'm going to go through the checklist, not individually, but just kind of at the end, and let's decide whether I have a newsworthy story. If this is good news judgment to say these are photojournalist type photos, or are they just photographs, interesting looking photographs of bears? So let's go. So they have the Welcome to Gatlinburg sign in front of the convention center. You see bears there, and on benches, that's also, I think, in front of the convention center. Bears, bears, more bears, bears with honey. You can see the cars in the background. There's a bear welcoming you to the Mountain Mall. There's a bear somewhere on the road, Friends of the Smokies. And I think that's the same bear from different angle. There's a little baby bear. Signs have bears everywhere. Every sign has a bear. Ripley's Believe It or Not. They have a bunch of those Ripley museums kind of things, but the Believe It or Not has bears. There's a close-up of the bears in the boat, but on the building. That was a sign in front of a shopping center. I just got the close-up of the bears. This is a wine place. They have bears. This is another wine place, a different one, but they also have a bear. You can see the wine glass, a bottle of wine. That was in the shop. This was kind of interesting. This is one of those guys that carves bears out of wood um, uh, from a chainsaw. He takes a block of wood, gets a chainsaw, and something like that is what ends up after he's done with it. That's some more pieces that he did. He wasn't actually doing it when I was there. That might have been an interesting story, but these are some of the bears that are for sale. And like I said, they're on buses. And this is sort of a dopey looking bear, also out on the street. So, oh, well, that's not a bear. I put that in there because I want you to know that it was not all bears, but there's a big ape there trying to get you to play putt-putt golf in one of the shops. Then I also went to this adventure park called Anarchista, and they had nothing but bears. Bears, bears, bears there too. That's one of their sort of shopping areas. Got a bear there by the water, and that's a different bear. And that's the close-up of that bear with a fish in its mouth. And they had carved bears just like on the streets. They even had a whole section called Bear Venture, and that has more bears and more bears and more bears. And so that's, there were bears everywhere. So my checklist is this. Do I have a newsworthy story? And I don't really think I do. I'm going to take these individually, but we'll go real fast. The elements, narrative. Do these bears, these pictures of these bears tell their own story? It's kind of debatable, maybe because there's so many, but I'm going to give that a red dash, meaning no. I don't think there's any of these photos tell their own story. I think you almost have to know more from a story than from the photos. Objective, well, non-biased, they're inanimate. I'm just going to give that a blue question mark because I don't think that's a plus or a minus. Timely, no, this is not a timely story, and these pictures aren't timely. Those things have been there for years and years and years. Gatlinburg has been known as Beartown or whatever, probably ever since the national park opened, which may have been, I don't know, back in the 1920s or 30s. Aesthetically interesting, it's vaguely, but I'm going to give that a question mark. So that's not a good score for elements. I don't have any green check marks or plus marks. But let's go to the basics. Were there humans or people? No, there weren't. Those are inanimate bears. They're not even real bears. So that's a big minus. Emotions. Well, if they're not human, there's no really emotions in that. There's no action. All those are just bears that are just standing there wherever, doing whatever they're doing. Unusual happenings. I guess you could say in a sense all the bears are unusual because I don't know of any other town that has that. Maybe there probably is somewhere out in Utah or wherever. But I don't even think it's that unusual, of a happening type thing. Focus and angles, yeah, I mean, the shots were kind of neat, and I got a lot of different angles so that they didn't all look the same. So that if I did try to put together a pictorial, at least it wouldn't look all the same. So I'm gonna give myself a plus for that. But as I look at this photojournalism checklist, I don't believe this was a newsworthy event. I took all these photos. I'm glad I took them, but I took photography photos. I did not take photos as a photojournalist. There really isn't a story here to tell. At least not that the pictures themselves can tell the story. All right, so clear the checklist. We won't do the checklist at the end, but just kind of keep it in mind. So I also went to Dollywood. I don't know if everybody knows what Dollywood is. It's an amusement park named after Dolly Parton, famous country singer. And because I'm scared of roller coasters, I literally am scared of roller coasters. Ones go upside down and all that kind of stuff. I mostly just stayed on the ground and did the train ride. I did the water ride, the flume ride. But no roller coasters. But I watched a lot of shows. And so I took some pictures at each of the shows I was at. And again, do they tell a story? Probably most of these don't, unless you knew the context. And if you knew the context and you looked at the photos, you could say, oh, that photo tells a story, if I knew this. So the first place I went was the Palace Theater. And they have a show there called The Kingdom Heirs. It's a gospel quartet, but they've been there ever since Dollywood's been there. So, I think the guys change every so often, right? One guy had been there from the very beginning, but the other people, I think, every few years they shuffle around. But that's a photo I got. And I think if you knew the context, you could say, yeah, that's newsworthy. I think if we just saw that photo, what is that? Oh, it's four guys. They're all wearing the same jackets, not counting the backup musicians. And they're obviously a musical group. But, if we know a little of the backstory, this is the gospel group that's been at Dollywood ever since Dollywood has been Dollywood. Then maybe that photo with three of them standing and singing, one of them singing at the keyboards, that might be newsworthy. Okay, this is the Dream Song Theater. You see Dolly Parton's mural on top of it. It had a show called Harmonies of the Heart. So again, probably not a big deal unless you know what the story is. So the show, Harmonies of the Heart, is, they might as well call it the Parton Family Show, because everybody in this show is a member of Dolly Parton's family. So all these people you see on stage, I count 7 right in this picture, and that's kind of an interesting looking picture. These are nieces and nephews and cousins, and so, they're making a good living probably because of Dolly, but if you knew that, then all of a sudden, this photo might make a lot of sense and become newsworthy. Oh, if we're doing a story on nepotism at Dollywood, or if we're just doing on the Parton music legacy beyond Dolly, then this is a great photo. That helps tell that story. But you need that context, because if you just looked at that photo by itself, it probably doesn't look that newsworthy. This is kind of interesting. These are just, I took a bunch here because it was outside, but these people aren't even singing. They talk, but they basically are lip syncing. But these are all people in college. And so what was interesting about this is Dollywood doesn't actually employ a lot of performers who are in college. Most of their performers are either older or just out of college in some of the shows, because they want the performers for year round. They don't want them just for the summer and then they go back to school. But this is a show that was designed to be just for the summer. So if you knew that, does that make any of these photos interesting? I don't know. I would say probably not. I don't know that there's a great news story here. But what if I focused on one person? What if I just focused on this young lady? And then I found some photos where she's, prominent in, and we see her doing things. Now, all of a sudden, maybe, and I'm not saying there is, but I'm saying maybe now there's a news story here, and some of these photos can be used because maybe we're doing a profile on her, or maybe we're doing a profile of college students who work at Dollywood, and it would make sense to focus on, just one or two. And so if we had a lot of photos for her. So again, context matters. By themselves, most of these photos don't look like they would be that newsworthy. But if we had the right context, they could be. Okay, Heart Song Theater, went to see this show. This was a kid's show. Um, I don't see a story there, but again, it's the same kind of thing. If I had taken more photos and focused on somebody, but those are the only photos I took there. This is one of the sort of semi-outdoor venues. It's outdoors, but covered. Obviously, there's country music bands at Dollywood. This is called the Smoky Mountain String Band at the Parton Back Porch Theater. So I just got a series of shots. This is a four-person band. We see a couple people on fiddle, and guy on the guitar, and woman on the upright bass, and then the two fiddlists, and then the guy on the guitar and the lady on the bass, and then each one of them have their individual pictures, and then that was it for that. So did I take enough? Is there a story there? I guess if you were doing a story on the Smoky Mountain String Band, then you'd want to use all those photos. You'd want to use the photos, the close-ups of the four in the group. It may be a group shot, and maybe that shot of establishing this is where they play at Dollywood, where the sign was. So there's that possibility. But on their own, probably they don't individually tell a story. There's not a great narrative there unless we know what the narrative is. Then the photos can start to be used as photojournalism. All right, these are three guys. They're kind of like Blue Man Group. You see they have that like tool stuff in the background, and they sit and they play drums on all kinds of different stuff. And here I got them on the buckets. But those are the only shots I took. I didn't think there was a great story there. I didn't know who the guys were, didn't have the name of the group. They just did a whole lot of drumming. So I actually gave up on saying, is there a story here? I decided there really wasn't. I went through that mental checklist in my head. This one was called it was at the Pines Theater. It's called the Dreamland Drive-In. This is the most popular show at Dollywood, and they play oldies, and they play oldies from the 50s and the 60s, and it's like a whole show. I mean, it's like over an hour long. It's the longest show by far, and the most popular, by the way, that they do on a daily basis. And all these people are just graduates of college, or have only been out for a year or two or whatever. So they're all pretty young. So when I knew that, I realized, there could be a story there. It might not be the story of the show that they're doing, although it is a very popular show. If I were doing a photojournalism essay on this show, then these shots that I have would probably make a lot of sense and be good for that. And this is the kind of shot that's sort of, it's a wide shot of the stage, and it sort of tells a lot, right? It's like that old 50s drive-in and that old 50s Coca-Cola ad, and you can see the kind of clothes that they're wearing, and the nerdy kid sitting all the way at the end, and Even the kind of car looks like it's from the 50s or 60s. So a shot like that can tell a lot. But you probably still need to know the context. So I'm not sure that any of the photos can stand on their own per se, but they could be part of a newsworthy story. Then here's another one and another one. That one's not too good because the head's cut off. But you can kind of, a little bit closer up with some of the folks. But if I were doing a story on uh, theater majors and what kind of first job they get out of school, well, these photos might be great because especially if I were working at a paper or an online site in Eastern Tennessee, where does a graduate of the University of Tennessee or East Tennessee State go to get their first job if they majored in musical theater? I bet you a lot of them go to Dollywood, and this is the kind of show they would do. So there could be a story there, right? So sometimes there's a story that we don't even necessarily know there's a story yet. But if the journalist part of us investigates it, or even our own creative mind, we can say, yes, I know there's a story here behind these photos. They may not necessarily stand on their own until we know what that story is, until we know what context we're going to use them in. And then the last show I will show you is, there's also a bird show there. And again, I'll just go through these quickly. Different kinds of, I think that first one was a falcon. That's an owl, obviously. Owl again. That's an eagle. But again, on their own, they don't look like a lot. But if you knew the context, and that is that this is a bird sanctuary, all the birds used in their show are rescues, and they live in captivity. They have room to fly and everything, but they basically live in a sanctuary, and they were all rescued either from places or somebody used them, had them as a pet, but more often they were found on the side of the road and were injured, and they were either brought or somehow they ended up here. They were rehabilitated, and then they get put as in part of the shows if they I guess follow directions. But not all the birds obviously are in the show that they have at the place. But so knowing that, all of a sudden these pictures that on their own don't really stand out, there is a context for them, and they can tell a story. This last one we're looking at right now can tell a story. This was a eagle that could not fly, and it was rehabilitated at this facility, and now it's part of the show, and it actually goes out like to school trips and shows kids how to or what it can do and things like that, and they use it for learning purposes. So it is kind of interesting. But so there's a story there, and I think as a photojournalist, a lot of times we take the photos and we know we're in the middle of a story, but sometimes we might not know what the story is even before we take the photo, and that's really a huge challenge for us. So what is newsworthy, and how do I make this photo newsworthy if I think it can be? And so that's really where our next assignment is going to be, is news judgment. Is this newsworthy or not? And can we take a photograph and on one hand say, this doesn't seem very newsworthy. And then on another hand, have a little context behind it, a little explanation. Here's how this was taken, and this is when this was taken. Here's the story behind this photograph that actually gives it that oomph to make it more than just a photograph and make it photojournalism. So we'll end right there. Again, so this was for 2 weeks, and we will have our week 4 coming up, and I'll have a video out on ethics. But we'll only have basically one, maybe call it 1.5 assignments this week, and you'll see them in the course content right underneath this video. So I'll talk to you guys later.